Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again in this YouTube astrological segment. I'm going to be talking about astrology and the death of Huey. He was a rapper, and it's sad we're hearing a lot of stories in the news about rappers and famous people dying. There was one person, a Hollywood writer, that had killed herself. This was apparently from, as far as Huey's death goes, this was a result of a shooting, and I haven't seen anything as far as any other details. The only thing I know is that it was the result of a shooting. I'm going to talk about some natal placements he has in his astrological chart and some transits where it may have manifested sadly in his passing. Now, the first thing I want to do though is state that, of course, my heart goes out to the family and close friends of Huey. If any of them see that, I just want to let them know that, and I offer my condolences to these people as well. But anyway, the first thing I noticed, I mean, this transit, the obvious one that stands out. Okay, he had transit Pluto in the first house, and I'll see when and of course that's his solar sunrise chart. I had to improvise once again because I don't have the time of birth. He was born January 1st, 1989, and the thing was when I looked at the chart transit in the solar sunrise chart transit, Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn fall in the first house, and the transit Pluto. Of course, Pluto can be connected with death, sadly, and you're talking about the first house of the physical body. Now, also at this time, he had transit Saturn was at least in loose conjunction to his natal Mercury in Capricorn. Mercury in Capricorn, the natal placement, the person needs to guard against becoming too despondent or melancholy, and the transit Saturn on that sadly might exacerbate that a little bit because, of course, Saturn is the sad planet, so to speak. And another thing that I noticed too in his chart, what I was saying, as far as talking about just the positive in his, as far as his career goes, in the solar sunrise chart, he had a number of planets in Capricorn, and he had a series of conjunctions with them. If I remember right, Uranus was the first planet, and then it was followed. I mean, I know he had, what I remember is that he had Uranus. Um, I believe he had Uranus, then Saturn, Neptune, and the Sun, all in a series of conjunctions, making a stellium in Capricorn. You start out with Uranus, of course. That could be the unusual, something unorthodox, and then you follow it up with Saturn. That, of course, could be the career, and then Neptune can be poetry and even music. And of course, I mean, when you're rapping, you're basically you're like a poet in your own rights, though in a musical manner. And also followed by the sun, of course, shining in this as well, getting the spotlight. And the fact that this energy is in Capricorn indicates to me that it was done with a lot of consistency, very regimented, and a lot of discipline as well. And the fact that all these planets except one, of course, the Sun, fall in the 12th house, this could be tied into hidden adversaries. He might have been making a lot of people rather jealous as a result of this as well, and it indicates he might have encountered more limitations and restrictions in this than we really are cognizant of. Yes, he was renowned and he was famous, but he might have actually, for all we know, there might have been even other things that maybe he could have done with this and reach at a higher plateau, but there could have been some rejection. For all we know, it's something we may never know, but at the same time, I'm not casting aspersions on him by any means. He had a much more successful life than most of us will ever dream of. Another interesting thing is that I saw on the Wikipedia.org, the write-up on him is that, so he said something about there was a time when he was, I guess, growing up, that his mother and father were where either it was either drugs or alcohol. And it's interesting, he has Neptune conjunct the sun in the chart. And the thing about that is that can manifest in some cases as the father, the sun being the father, it can reflect the father being involved in drugs. And also, don't forget, I mean, also Saturn is in that mix as well, at least in a loose conjunction to Neptune. I think it actually made a conjunction to Neptune, but that's something you could check and confirm. I honestly don't remember that 100%, but that's another indicator of a father that might be involved in some drug use. And of course, you're talking, I mean, this is something too. Another thing that I noticed in his chart, his natal chart, he also has Mars. Well, in the solar sunrise chart, he has Mars in the third house, so that could be an indicator of something volatile or even gunfire in one's neighborhood or through a neighbor. I have Mars in my third house natally, and I've had contentious and even acrimonious experience. I've had physical confrontations with neighbors in my past. I'm not saying that was the case in this instance, but it does increase that propensity for that. Now, at this time as well, he also, another thing I want to say in his natal chart, he also has, and again, sorry, correct, the solar sunrise chart, Jupiter in Taurus close to the algol position, and Jupiter is conjunct that fifth house cusp in the solar sunrise chart. Now, that to me, that could suggest, I mean, Jupiter, as I've stated in previous videos, can be very benign and benevolent, but it could also have a tendency to enlarge and expand. This can enlarge very fixated, even obsessive qualities in some kind of entertainment or music field, or something of creativity, or even entertainment being close to the fifth house cusp, because the algol degree can be about about losing one's head. It's generally not going to be literal, but it can. But when they say losing one's head, going all out, going overboard, perhaps figuratively speaking, on something about something. So another thing that I noticed in the solar sunrise chart, he had the ruler of the eighth house, of course, conjunct the first house, because on the eighth house cusp he had Leo on it. Leo on the eighth house cusp sometimes can indicate, I don't want to say flamboyant, but a rather dramatic death, and one that might gain a lot of notoriety and exposure. And that ruler, of course, conjuncts the first house cusp, because in the solar sunrise chart, of course, you have the sun conjunct the first house cusp at the same place, at the same position. So, and you're talking about the first house in astrology can correspond with Aries, and really involve, I would say, perhaps volatility as well, because the first house does correspond with Aries. So it's not surprising that his death was one of a volatile nature, and it was one connected with gunfire. And also the intercepted ruler of that eighth house, Mercury, falls in the first house as well. So that could even accentuate or reaffirm that propensity for something like that transpiring. Now, we also, as far as I want to say, I want to go back to another natal placement. Of course, the sun in Capricorn, of course, the basic character can be one that's very ambitious, one that is career oriented, one that could be older and more mature than others at his or her age. You're talking about the basic want for career and ambition for reputation and improving stature and life success. The moon is in Libra based on the solar sunrise time. Based on that, if assuming his moon is in Libra, actually, that would indicate that Capricorn energy could be injected into something with the arts, and in this case, music. Now, he also had transit North Node in Gemini, was not far from his natal Chiron in Cancer. When you're talking about transits that involve the North Node in astrology, they can often be about issues one may have to address or confront. This could be about physical wounds in some cases. It would not surprise me if he was shot in the chest, given that that he has Chiron in Cancer in the natal chart. And another interesting transit he had was at the time of this passing, was that transit moon was in fairly close proximity to his natal south node. When you're talking about the south node in transit, it can often be about issues, situation one may be going away from. The moon can be connected with the soul in astrology. Sadly, this could have been reflect the passing of the soul, but it could also be about, sadly, the end of a public, maybe of a public position, a work. I mean, given in Virgo, especially emphasizing a work-related public position, and it's really not much more I want to say about this. Hold on a moment, people. Now, another thing that I noticed, sadly, is he had transit Sun. You could say, well, transit Sun also was close to his natal Chiron in Cancer, and that could be an indicator of another indicator of a wound, really, to the physical body, because the Sun can represent the physical body. In astrology, the transit Sun was also making a loose opposition, I believe it was to his natal Neptune. And Neptune in the 12th house in the solar sunrise chart. This could be an indicator of really having difficulty even trying to decipher who your hidden adversaries are. Neptune in the 12th house by itself can indicate that, but the Sun rules the left or the right eye in astrology, depending on gender. And the fact is that it really, this is a transit, I would say, is where you're having really strong difficulty in seeing a lot of things clearly. In the fact that Neptune is in the 12th house in the solar sunrise chart, that is hidden adversaries. But I guess we're going to find out more about this his death as time progresses and they get more information out of this. There may actually be more information now pertaining to this online. That's something I want to actually look at. I'm really curious about this. So, and also another thing too, we had transit Uranus in his solar sunrise chart of the 4th house at the time of his death. And this is not surprising that you're talking about, and the 4th house could be about, is connected with the end or latter part of one's life, and the fact that you're talking about transit Uranus in it, one that might end very shockingly and surprisingly, is a lot of in a very unpredictable fashion. He also had the ruler of the 12th house in the solar sunrise chart in the 4th house. That could be restrictions and limitation and sorrow at the latter part of life. He also had the ruler of the 4th house conjunct the 12th house cusp in the solar sunrise chart. So that kind of reaffirms and reinforces what I just stated. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.